Hey everyone, thanks for watching. A big shout out to our subscribers. You're the reason these chilling stories keep going. But here's the thing, only 10% of viewers are subscribed. If you enjoy the content, hitting that subscribe button helps more than you know. It takes just a second, but it makes a huge difference. Don't forget to like and share to keep the chills spreading. Thanks again, you made this possible. See you in the next one, if you dare. Patterns matter in a funeral home. Services begin, families arrive, memories are shared, and eventually the casket is closed. Flowers arrive looking perfect, and within days, they fade. That cycle rarely changes. When it does, you remember. It started with the funeral of Martha Keene. She was 76, a retired elementary school librarian from Dayton, Ohio. She had 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. Most of the family still lived close by, and nearly everyone in the small church congregation attended her service. The turnout was modest, maybe 25 people, but the atmosphere was warm. The family chose a casket spray of red roses, white lilies, and strands of baby's breath. Classic, respectful, the kind of arrangement that photographs well and usually holds for just long enough. The service was quiet. People stood up and shared stories about Martha's gentle nature. One woman recalled how Martha used to keep the library open late so neighborhood kids had a safe place to sit. A former student talked about how Martha always remembered his name even after 30 years. The mood was sad but calm. When it ended, my staff and I did what we always do. We carried the flower spray into the prep room, where cool air slows the wilting until families come back for them, or we donate them to a nursing home. I've been in this business for more than 20 years. I know the timetable of flowers better than I know my own. Roses stay sharp for 3 to 4 days. Lilies begin to droop after 5. Baby's breath doesn't last a week before it begins to crumble. By day 10, almost every arrangement is finished. This one didn't follow. Day 3, flawless. Day 5, no change. Day 7, every stem looked as if it had been cut that morning. At first, I thought someone had swapped them out. I checked the card tucked into the foam, the one signed by Martha's family. The handwriting was still smudged slightly from the humidity in the chapel that day. The water in the base was plain tap water, no preservatives, no powder packet. I asked both of my assistants. They shook their heads. By the end of the second week, every other bouquet from that service had browned and gone soft. Martha's spray looked untouched. People started noticing. The prep room doubles as a hallway. Staff passed by it all day. A few slowed their pace when they walked past the counter. One attendant asked me if the flowers were fake. I told him no. He backed away and didn't come near them again. On day 15, I moved them into the lobby. I told myself it was to clear space in the prep room, but the truth was simpler. I didn't want to be alone with them anymore. There was something wrong about their stillness. The scent of roses stayed sharp, sharper than normal, strong enough to fill the lobby. It didn't fade. It grew. It clung to the building until it seemed out of place. One evening after hours, I walked through the lobby alone. The spray sat on the table by the front window. My footsteps echoed in the empty hall. As I passed, I thought I heard a soft slip, like a petal falling. I stopped. I checked the table. Nothing had fallen. The roses were tight, the lilies wide and white, the baby's breath intact. By the 3rd week, visitors attending other funerals whispered about them. A woman attending a wake touched the petals and pulled her hand back quickly. She muttered, "They don't want to let go." On the 21st day, something finally changed. I arrived in the morning and saw a single rose petal lying on the table beneath the spray. It was fresh, white at the edges, no browning at all. The air felt heavier that morning, thick with scent, as if 100 flowers had been packed into the room. That afternoon, the Keene family arrived unexpectedly. They had decided to take the spray home. When they saw it in the lobby, they froze. One of Martha's daughters touched a rose and whispered, "Mom always said she could keep flowers alive longer than anyone else." They carried the arrangement away. I thought it was over. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, Martha's son-in-law came by to sign some paperwork. Before he left, he told me his wife had placed the spray in their mother's old living room. The flowers were still fresh. Not a single petal had fallen since the one in our lobby. The smell was strong enough to fill the house, even upstairs. His face was pale when he told me. 3 days later, one of my staff members came to me shaking. She said she had driven past the Keene house at night. She swore she saw the flowers through the front window. They glowed faintly, as if reflecting light even though the room inside was dark. I told her she was tired. I told myself she was mistaken. A week later, Martha's daughter called. She asked if it was possible for flowers to stay perfect after a month. I told her no. She said they were still flawless. She said the scent was so strong it woke her in the night. I didn't have an answer. 3 days later, I drove to the house myself. The spray sat on a wooden table near the window. The roses were crisp, the lilies perfect, the baby's breath white and strong. Time had stopped around them. The rest of the room looked ordinary, curtains with dust, couch cushions sagging. The flowers were new. The smell hit me as soon as I stepped close. It wasn't pleasant anymore. It was suffocating, heavy, like the air in a sealed crypt. Martha's daughter begged me to take them away. She said she couldn't sleep. She said she heard petals falling at night but never found them on the floor. I carried the spray back to the funeral home. The moment I set them on the prep counter, the air thickened. That night, as I finished paperwork, I heard it again. The faint slip of petals. When I went to check, 5 petals lay scattered on the floor. Each one is perfect, soft, not wilted. I left them. The next morning, they were gone. The counter was clean. The spray was untouched. The flowers lasted 37 days before they began to change. On the 38th, I saw one lily browned at the edge. By day 40, half the roses had collapsed. By day 42, the spray looked like every other dead arrangement. We threw it out. I thought I would feel relieved. Instead, I felt like something was watching. Months later, I still think about those flowers. I think about how they resisted decay, how their scent filled every hallway, how petals fell where none were missing. I remember the look on my staff's faces when they walked by, unsettled but unwilling to speak. I remember Maria telling me she dreamed of them, standing upright in a room without water, roots spreading across the floor. She said she woke up with the smell in her nose. I try to explain it away. Maybe the house was colder than I thought. Maybe someone replaced the flowers without telling me. Maybe stress made me smell things that weren't there. But then I remember the 5 petals on the floor that vanished by morning. I remember the glow that the staff swore they saw through the Keen's window. There's a rhythm to this work. Families, services, flowers, endings. Martha Keen's flowers broke that rhythm. They didn't just last. They refused to end. And I can't help but wonder, even now, if something else was holding on through them. In funeral service work, the smallest details often carry the heaviest weight. Outsiders rarely understand that. They see the flowers, the polished wood, the music, the order of the ceremony. But behind it all, in the back rooms and office drawers, are objects so small that they could fit in a child's pocket. Objects that can decide whether a service runs smoothly or collapses in front of dozens of grieving eyes. The casket key is one of them. It doesn't look like much. Barely 2 inches long, a short stem with a rounded head, no ornamentation, no color. To the untrained eye, it could be mistaken for a drawer key or the kind you might find on a luggage lock. But it isn't. It is forged to fit one specific lock and one only. No store sells replacements. No locksmith keeps spares. Each casket has its key, and once the lid is sealed, only that key can undo the lock. Without it, you are helpless. The only other way to open the casket is with tools, an undignified, ugly act that risks scratching wood, bending metal, and worst of all, doing so in front of a family already drowning in grief. That is why we handle those keys the way surgeons handle scalpels. Each is placed into a manila envelope, tagged, documented in the case file, and stored in a locked desk drawer in the chapel office. Before any service, the funeral director checks the key twice, once the evening prior, once again on the morning of. They are never to go missing, which is why what happened that autumn Saturday in Mapleton, Ohio, has never left me. The funeral was for Henry Hank Watson, a retired county sheriff. He had worn the badge for 30 years, the kind of man who never missed a town parade, who once pulled over in a blizzard to push a stranger's car half a mile up an icy hill. The whole county knew him. When he passed, it felt as if the county itself had lost its anchor. The family wanted a large service. Morning viewing, afternoon ceremony, full police honor guard, and a graveside procession with rifles and flags. We had prepared everything days in advance. The casket was mahogany with nickel trim, heavy, elegant, solemn. We had embalmed and dressed him in his sheriff's uniform, polished badge pinned to his chest. By Friday night, we had completed every cosmetic touch. The lid was locked. The presentation was ready. On Saturday morning, at 9 sharp, I went to the chapel office to collect the key. It should have been waiting in the drawer, inside an envelope labeled in thick black marker, case number 4427, Watson, Henry, October 14th, 2023. The envelope was not there. At first, I thought my eyes had skipped over it. I removed every envelope one by one, setting them on the desk. Johnson, Bellamy, Ortiz, Mendez. No Watson. My hands felt clumsy as I checked again. Nothing. A slow unease crept into me. Perhaps Maria, my senior assistant, had taken it out early. Perhaps Kevin, the young attendant, had been overly eager to prepare. I asked them. Both shook their heads, puzzled. I returned to the desk, unlocked the drawer again, and this time emptied it completely. Pens, prayer cards, blank registers. Not a single envelope missing, except Watson's. I felt the back of my neck go cold. The family would arrive in less than 2 hours. Without the key, if they requested a final adjustment, say, placing a flower in his hands, we would have to refuse. Worse, if they insisted, we would have no dignified way to comply. Ordering a replacement was impossible. Forcing the lock would scar the wood. There was no choice but to proceed without it. Still, I hated the thought. In this work, preparedness is respect. A missing key, no matter how small, felt like failure. By 10:30, the Watson family arrived. His widow, Grace, walked slowly, her hands trembling, though her back remained straight. Beside her came their son, Thomas, in full police dress uniform. 2 daughters followed, one clutching a rosary, the other gripping her child's hand. Behind them flowed cousins, neighbors, officers in navy coats, even the mayor. The chapel filled with quiet murmurs and the faint, steady scent of roses and carnations. The casket stood beneath an arch of flowers, flanked by flags, its nickel trim catching the white light overhead. The viewing began. People approached in slow lines, resting hands on the lid, whispering final words, leaving tokens, a sheriff's patch, a folded note, a medal from a fellow officer. The air carried grief so heavy it pressed against the ribs. I stood near the back, hands folded, watching the flow, keeping my attention sharp. That was when I saw it. At first, just a glint of metal, a flicker of light near the seam of the casket lid. I squinted, taking a step forward, and then my stomach lurched. The missing key was there, centered perfectly above the lock. Not on the floor, not on the flowers, not by the guest book, on the polished lid itself, as if it had been deliberately placed. I froze. It had not been there during setup. I was certain. I had inspected the presentation personally, nor had it been there when the family entered. I had been watching, yet now, in the middle of the viewing, there it lay. I darted a glance toward Maria. She was standing near the aisle, her face pale, eyes locked on the casket. She gave the faintest shake of her head. She hadn't put it there. Neither had Kevin. And for anyone else to do it, they would have had to step forward in plain view of dozens of mourners. No one had. I said nothing. Not to the family, not to the guests. My throat was dry, my heart pounding. The viewing continued. Grace leaned down to touch her husband's hand through the glass panel. Thomas straightened his uniform cap. Officers bowed their heads. None of them looked at the key. None seemed to notice it gleaming there under the lights. When the family finally stepped away, I moved toward the casket. The key was cool in my hand. Too cool. As if it had been resting in a drawer all morning, not recently held. I slid it into my pocket, gave a brief nod to Maria, and ordered the chapel doors closed. I did not mention it to the Watsons. That night, after the honor guard, the rifles, the procession, and the lowering into Mapleton Cemetery, I returned to the chapel office. My hands trembled slightly as I queued up the security footage. The fixed camera offered only a wide-angle view, the kind you install for insurance rather than detail. Still, it was clear enough to track movements. I watched the morning setup. Empty lid, no key. Guests filed in. The viewing began. At 40 minutes in, the image wavered, a distortion in the light, as though a shadow brushed across the lens. Then, nothing. No figure, no hand. But when the picture steadied again, the key was there, plain as day. I replayed it 3 times, hoping I had missed something, but the result never changed. The key appeared where it had not been, and no visible person had placed it. We searched the office again, every drawer, every cabinet. The manila envelope with Hank Watson's name never surfaced. To this day, that key sits in a plain, unmarked box on my desk. Not an active inventory, not documented, just kept. I cannot bring myself to throw it away, though I do not wish to use it again. What explanation could I ever give that a crucial object vanished from a locked drawer, only to materialize in front of dozens of witnesses who never noticed? That a camera showed light bending, shadows shifting, and then an object appearing out of nowhere? Funeral directors thrive on order. We soothe families with routine, with precision. We believe in logic. Yet there are moments, rare but undeniable, when logic breaks apart. When something refuses to fit the file notes, the case log, or the tidy explanation. That Saturday, the key we lost reappeared exactly where it should never have been. On the sealed casket of a beloved sheriff, in front of his family, in front of an entire town. And though I will never admit it aloud, deep down, I believe it was placed there. By whom or what, I do not know. In this line of work, you learn to manage air before you manage anything else. People imagine funeral homes smell bad. They don't, at least not when the work is done correctly. We keep the air moving, we keep flowers in check, and we add just enough neutral fragrance to keep the viewing rooms steady. The point is to remove distraction. Families shouldn't be thinking about the mechanics of preservation. They should be thinking about the person they have come to see. Because of that, I pay attention to scent the way an electrician pays attention to current. I know the difference between damp chrysanthemums and cut roses. I know the faint bite of disinfectant when a mop bucket is fresh. I know the soft powder smell of cosmetics and the clean edge of the preservatives we seal away. When something is off, I know it in the first 10 steps. The service I'm thinking of took place in Bremerton, Washington, late in November. The sun fades early there that time of year, and by mid-afternoon, you can feel night leaning in. We'd set up the viewing room the evening before. The casket was a walnut half couch with brushed nickel hardware. The floral pieces were simple, white lilies and small sprays of greenery. The dimmers were locked at the level I use for afternoon services, and the thermostat was steady. There was nothing unusual about the case file. The decedent, Mr. Robert Bob Hale, was 84. No trauma, no condition that complicates restoration, no autopsy. The embalming had gone smoothly and without correction. The cosmetics were light. His suit was pressed and fit correctly. I had checked everything twice. I was on the side aisle when the family came in. It was the usual mix for a small town. A widow with her sister, 2 adult children, a few neighbors, and a handful of people from the shipyard where he had worked. They moved into the front rows, and the room settled into that quiet you only get when people are trying not to cry. I took my place along the wall, where I could see the door and the casket without being in anyone's way. That was when I noticed it, a faint sweetness with a metallic edge. It wasn't floral. I know lilies and roses by heart, and this wasn't that. It wasn't the sharp, clean note of the chemicals either. This sat lower in the air, not heavy, present. If you didn't know to listen for it, you might miss it. But once you caught it, it didn't let go. I ran the usual checks without leaving my spot. I watched the vents along the baseboard. They were moving air at a steady rate. I watched the candles at the front, battery, not flame. I looked for anything that could have overheated. Lamp housings, an old extension cord someone might have swapped in. Everything looked right. Within 10 minutes, Ethan, one of my attendants, came down the aisle with a box of tissues for the front row. He didn't stop, but he slowed just enough to tilt his head a fraction toward me. It's our quiet way of asking, "Do you smell that?" I gave him the smallest nod. He moved on. The room stayed steady. People stood and sat. Someone coughed into a handkerchief. A cousin walked up to the casket and rested a hand on the rail. The faint, metallic, sweet note neither rose nor dropped. In normal conditions, scent breathes with the room, stronger when people move, weaker when someone opens a door, gone when the air cycle catches up. This didn't do that. It held its line. I made my way to the back of the room so I could pass the doorway and check the corridor. The lobby smelled normal. Rugs, paper programs, a trace of the winter coats everyone had carried in. I stepped back into the viewing room. The scent was right there again, same as before. Halfway through the 2-hour block, I sent our other attendant, Marisol, to rotate the water in the side arrangements. She walked the perimeter, lifted each vase, and set it down again. She is good at her job and notices small things. When she passed me on her way out, she kept her face neutral and gave a short blink. That means, yes, I smell it, without breaking the stillness. The family said nothing. No one wrinkled a nose or looked around. The minister read a psalm and a few short remarks written by the son. The grandchildren took turns with the guest book. People moved like they always do. The room did not change. I kept a clock in my head. 15 minutes, 30, an hour. Every time I checked, the scent was the same. When the last guest left, I closed the door and waited with the family while they said their goodbyes. I stood far enough back to give them space, but close enough to be useful. The scent didn't deepen with the quiet. It didn't fade when the heaters kicked once at the top of the hour. It stayed. When the family finally stepped out, I locked the register book, moved the stanchions, and started the breakdown. Then we did the sweep. The sweep is not complicated. We touch everything air touches. We pulled the drapes away from the wall and felt the dry wall for moisture. We opened every floral cushion and checked the foam. I sniffed the water in the vases. Nothing but the dull, earthy flatness of room temperature tap. We checked under the stands for spills and inside the candle pillars to make sure no one had slipped in a real tea light. We lifted the HVAC grills and looked for dust mats that could throw a smell when the system cycles. We found nothing. Next, we went technical. I opened the back door of the casket lift to see if hydraulic fluid had bled. Bone dry. We checked the dimmer rack for an overheated module. All cool. The outlet by the far wall sometimes serves as a dehumidifier. It was empty. No ozone machine had run in that room in the last month. I checked the service log to be sure. No filter change that day. No maintenance ticket. No open work order on the thermostat. Last, I confirmed the case details we always confirm. I changed gloves and checked the casket interior for any sign of seepage or cosmetic transfer. The lining was clean. The pillow was clean. The garments were clean. The seal was intact. The prep on Mr. Hale had been a textbook case, and I would have noticed if it wasn't. There was nothing in that room that should have produced a metallic sweet note at that level and for that length of time. We aired the space. Doors to the hallway open. The lobby door cracked to pull a cross breeze. I set the air handler to turn over the room for an hour and left the lights at half. The scent didn't fight or drift. It sat until the building's cycle finished and the air read neutral again. I went home with the feeling you get when a machine runs noise you can't trace. Not a threat, not pain, just the sense that you missed something. The next morning, I walked in before the first staff member and stood in the doorway of the viewing room. Neutral, rugs, wood polish, a little stale winter coat in the hallway, nothing else. Ethan arrived, stepped in beside me, and sniffed. Clear, he said. He meant it as a fact, not an opinion. He is like me. The air is either right or wrong. We set the room for the next family. The case files turned and we moved on. You would think that would be the end of it. For most things, it is. But small details stick. The reason is simple. In our work, scent tells you whether conditions are under control. When something behaves in a way that doesn't match what you know, it sits at the edge of your thoughts for longer than you want. A week later, I asked Marisol what she had noticed in that room. We were in the garage moving a rack of stands. She took a minute to answer. It stayed, she said. I kept waiting for the door movement to change it. It didn't. She added nothing else, which told me she was done thinking about it on purpose. I wrote a short note on the internal log. Nothing dramatic, just a line that said, unidentified odor noted, viewing room 2, constant intensity, post-service sweep negative, ventilation cleared. You do that when something doesn't fit. If it happens again, you want to see a pattern. Between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we ran 29 visitations. I handled 14. None of those rooms carried anything like what we'd smelled that afternoon. In January, I had the ductwork cleaned early. It was due in March anyway. The service tech pulled the grills and brushed the lines. The dust he brought out was unremarkable. I asked him about the metal coil housing in the air handler and whether it can create a smell. He said not at that temperature, not at those cycle lengths. "If something burns," he said, "you'll know." We would have. We didn't. I don't tell families stories. I don't tell staff what to think. I do my job and keep the room steady. But there are 3 things about that service that won't settle, even now. First, scent usually changes with people. Movement lifts it. An open door will cut it. Heat tightens it. Cold drops it. What we smelled didn't change at all. It held the same line from the first guest to the last candle. Second, when scent stays constant, it usually means a source is feeding it. Something like a spill, a material breaking down, a product left open. We checked every source a viewing room can hold. Nothing was there. Third, I felt watched. Not threatened, not even uncomfortable, just watched. It's not a word I use often because it reads like superstition, and we don't have room for superstition in this business. But that's what it was. The air had an attention to it, as if the room itself was aware of us. I didn't say that to anyone. I wrote my note and got on with the rest of the week. 2 months later, Mr. Hale's daughter came by to pick up extra prayer cards we had printed. We spoke in the lobby. She asked, because people always ask, if everything had gone smoothly. I told her it had. It was the truth. Services are measured by whether families get the time they need, and they did. As she was leaving, she paused by the door and said, "It felt peaceful that day." She meant the room. She said it in a way that told me she had been worried about something before she came in. Many families are. She didn't mention scent. She didn't mention anything unusual. Whatever held the room that afternoon held only us. A year has passed since that service. I can list 100 tasks we've carried out since. Cleanings, repairs, new shelves, camera upgrades, a repaint of the main hallway, replacement carpets in the lobby. None of those tasks change the way I think about that afternoon. I don't attach a meaning to it. I don't try to make it into a larger story. I put it where it sits, an anomaly that stayed steady in a place where almost nothing stays steady. Sometimes, after hours, I walk into viewing room 2 with the lights at half and the thermostat holding at 68. I stand at the side aisle where I stood that day, and I breathe the room in. Most nights it's nothing. Carpet, dust, the faint plastic smell of the easels if they've been put away wrong. On one night in March, I thought I caught a sweet trace and felt my body go tight, but it was only a vase in the sink cupboard where someone had left a flower packet open. I closed it, and the air went flat again. If you're looking for a conclusion, you won't find one. We took the conditions apart and found nothing. The air behaved in a way that the air shouldn't. Then it went back to normal. The work resumed. I keep the log note because I believe in records. Someone will read it in 5 years and ask what it means. I'll tell them what I told you. The room smelled like a faint metallic sweetness, steady for the entire service, unchanged by airflow or heat, noticed by staff and not by family, gone the next morning. We inspected the room and found no source. That's all. If you ask me what I think, not what I can prove, but what I think, I would say this. People bring the world with them when they come to say goodbye. Sometimes they bring grief, and you can feel it like a weight in the aisle. Sometimes they bring laughter, and the room relaxes, and sometimes something quieter comes with them and sits down in the air until the work is done. We have a rule here. You don't disturb a service unless you have to. On that afternoon in Bremerton, we didn't have to. The room stayed calm. The family had their time. And if we weren't the only ones present, whoever else was there understood the rule too. I still check the vents first when I walk into any viewing room. I still keep flowers to a reasonable number. I still set the neutral fragrance to just above what most people can notice. Routine is not just habit. It's the structure that lets families do what they came to do. If something breaks that structure, we fix it. If we can't fix it, we contain it. And if we can't contain it, we wait for it to pass. That day, it passed overnight. I left the building that evening by the back door that opens onto the small lot facing the alley. The sky had already gone dark. The cold air outside was plain, exhaust from the street, wet concrete, the hint of salt that comes in from the sound when the wind is right. I locked the door and stood for a moment with the key in my hand. I tried to describe the scent to myself one last time so I'd have the words for the log. Metallic, sweet, faint, level. I wrote those words later and filed them where we file everything that doesn't fit. When I think of Mr. Hale now, I don't think of the anomaly first. I think of the way his daughter's hands shook when she rested them on the back of the front pew, and the way the widow looked at the casket as if she were trying to memorize the exact distance between the rail and the edge. I think of the neighbor from the shipyard who stood at the far side and didn't move for 10 full minutes. I think of normal things, because normal things are what matter here. But I haven't forgotten the air. It stayed the same when everything else was moving. In this building, that almost never happens. So we keep the rooms ready, we mark the vents, we check the candles, we calibrate the lights so faces don't wash out in photographs. We make everything as ordinary as it can be. And once in a long while, the air holds something we can't control, and we make room for that too. I don't have a better answer. I have the log sheet, the memory of the room, and the knowledge that the scent was there until it wasn't. If you stood beside me that afternoon, you would have noticed it after a few breaths, and then lost the ability not to notice it. You would have watched the family and kept your face calm, and let the service go on. You would have waited with us until the door closed, and the last car pulled away. You would have helped raise the casket and pull the stands and check the foam, and look for the thing that wasn't there. And you would have gone home thinking about the simple fact that in a place designed to keep the world predictable for 2 hours at a time, something proved it wasn't. The next morning, the room was neutral. We set it for the next family. The work continued. If there was anything else in the room that afternoon, it left without leaving a trace. That is the most I can say. We don't talk much about it now. There isn't anything to add. But every so often, when I'm standing in the aisle and the room is quiet and the flowers are set and the door is about to open, I take one breath and make sure the air is what it should be. If it isn't, I will know. And if it is, I move aside and let the family in. Either way, I am there and the room is ready.